You can plot any AI solution across these two dimensions. One is a dimension of change. How much do I need to change in order to use this tool? And then the other dimension is how much do I need to trust it to get it right for it to be useful? And so if you sort of imagine these 2x2, and you think about the quadrants, then the bottom left has...
Welcome to The Peel. I'm your host, Turner Novak, founder of Banana Capital. Today's guest is Guy Podjarny, co-founder of Blaze, Snyk, and most recently, Tessel. He gives us a crash course on building and investing in AI and why he started a new company despite Snyk's success.
There's no satisfaction without struggle. And if you're unwilling to put yourself in a place in which you're trying something hard, you don't get satisfaction.
Why AI startups are riskier than non-AI startups.
The challenge with AI is there are no incumbents. You basically don't know who your competitors are, and you might only find out when you're already fairly deeply into your journey. There are 15 other companies doing exactly the same. You should assume that's the case. And the incumbents are more aware and more active. I think the counter-argument is...
We go inside the early days of his first company, Blaze, and then Snyk.
What I saw was the opportunity to apply the playbook from these DevOps companies to the world of security. I almost didn't go into it because...
Struggling to hire the first few employees.
I asked almost everyone I know whether they want to come work for me, and literally all of them said no.
Navigating Snyk's failed Series A.
2 years in, we had about $100,000 ARR. We looked very compelling from the outside. And so a lot of VCs were circling. Everybody looks behind the scenes and they realize there's no revenue.
A crash course on developer marketing.
When people are not doing things, it's either because you've tackled the wrong problem and they don't care enough, or because it's too hard and you need to make it easy. And yet what people try to do is they try to educate you to make you care more. That's the hardest path.
And the best decisions he made early in his career.
I think sales engineers are the most underappreciated people in the company. It's never up and to the right. And you need to remember that because there are a lot of tough moments.
Before we talk to Guy, I publish new episodes every week exploring the world's greatest startup stories. Subscribe and check the link in the show notes to make sure you never miss an episode. Guy, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. You wrote a really interesting blog post. I believe by the time this airs, it'll be a couple weeks ago, all about kind of what you're thinking about AI and kind of a framework for people to think about it. And I wanted to kick things off. If we could just talk about it for a couple minutes. Can you kind of describe the post and then we can get into it a little bit more?
Yeah, of course. I think AI is like exciting and confusing. And there are many reasons for that. Its newness is one of them. But I think one of it is that there's kind of this range that on one hand, you see these solutions that you can immediately see how, if they work, if they do what they do, and you can try that out, they just give you superpowers, like code completion stuff, or like they'll write my SDR email, or those whatever captured notes in an email in a meeting, and they look amazing. But if you think about building a company on that sort of front, or if you're an investor, you're thinking about investing in it, immediately it was like, well, this is cool, but are there not like 100 others like this? Like, does it have longevity? Is it just a thin LLM wrapper, etc.?
I was going to say, are they usually sort of line extensions of existing products? Like there's a scaled software company that sort of also includes that feature as well. That seems to be a commonality there.
So that also could be, and they kind of hit the UX. So you immediately see the usefulness of it, but you doubt the longevity of it. And on the other side of the equation, you have these fantastical kind of AI companies that represent this like really amazing vision of where AI will take us. It's like, yeah, but when, is that sort of like fine? And like we've been waiting for self-driving cars for so long, would it ever arrive? And so like my mental model, which I built somewhat inadvertently, just like for my own purposes, as I was thinking about AI ideas for Snyk, as I was investing in a bunch of AI companies, and as I was thinking about my own kind of Tessel, the company that I founded, and how do I think about that? Like, I found myself creating this mental model for evaluating or sort of thinking about an AI solution and placing it across its sort of journey towards kind of an AI native future. And in a nutshell, I think you can plot any AI solution across these two dimensions. One is a dimension of change, and it really goes from existing workflows, I can use it the way I do today, to new workflows, like a brand new way of doing things. So this is like, how much do I need to change in order to use this tool? And then the other dimension is one of trust. And that is really like, how much do I need to trust it to get it right for it to be useful? And so change is about being able to use it, and trust is really about how much trust do I need to be for it to be useful. And so if you sort of imagine these 2x2, like these sort of dimensions creating a 2x2, and you think about the quadrants, then the bottom left has these low change, low trust environments. So these are things that plug into your current ways of working, and you can eyeball and see if the result is correct. So like code completion, text completion, those things are good examples. Like, just typing the next letter, you look at it, you say yes, correct, not correct, putting aside a little bit how much attention do you doing, and do you miss imperfections in code and things like that. But still, you can eyeball, you can think about it. An SDR email, something short, pointing out a potential concern in an X-ray, for instance, for someone to attend. Like, you can look at this like, yes, this is a concern, this is not a concern. So all of these things they plug into your current way of working, and so there's really no friction around that. They require little trust, and so that's the high adoption quadrant. Over there you get a lot of them. But indeed, oftentimes it's already a current way of working. You're already doing it with some existing tools, and so the problem over there is, what if the incumbent that is already providing these ways, what if they introduce this as a feature? So that's kind of the starting point, where I think a lot of the noise you see here today about companies that are successfully getting adoption, that are sort of showing big numbers, they fall into that bracket. But it's highly, highly competitive, and it's not clear that it's durable. And then if you kind of go up the trust ladder, then you go towards things that are more autonomous. And so you might find like Intercom's chat agent. It represents a customer representative, and it talks to a customer. You have to trust that it gets it right often for it to be useful. Like, if you need to scrutinize everything before it tells it to a customer,
it kind of defeats the purpose. Yeah.
Yeah. I think an interesting other example there is robotaxis. So like, robotaxis actually work the same way you do today. Like in the Fin example, it works the way you do, right? You're already chatting. It's products that are already chat-based, or like search. It's already something you're doing. So like, robotaxis are another good example of that. They're the same. Like, you open up the same app, you order the car, a car arrives, you come in, it drops in, like very little change, except there's no driver. There's a machine that's driving it. So like, you need to trust that you're going to get there alive, right?
Yes, it's a big trust is a big component.
So it's like low change, high trust. And so that's really like a prime IP land. So like, over there, it's really, if you think you can really build moats around trust, which some element of it is human. Okay, can you kind of build confidence? But also it's around like sophistication and technology, and it might be durable. I would still say incumbents have a big opportunity over there, but it's much harder to replicate, because it's something that you really need to, like, it's the 80-20, right? Like, it's easy to get something that is sometimes useful, and it's hard to get something that is reliably useful.
So it's probably a big R&D effort to just develop the thing to a state where the customer or the user can trust it enough.
Yeah, correct. And it's still, because it's low change, there's still an advantage to the incumbents, because they control the current workflow. And so, it might be like Intercom is a good example. They are already the little chat widget on a lot of websites. And so when they lean into that, they can build that. It's not a new way. If chat was a brand new way, then that was different.
So then, if I was a founder trying to build a AI native customer support and compete against Intercom, I would probably need to completely change the paradigm of interaction and create something new that requires a new type of adoption.
Precisely. And that's really where the change axis comes along. So change is really about new ways of working. And so if you think about like the bottom right, as I call that, like disruption opportunity, it's a disruption opportunity because it's something that overhauls how it's being done. And the example I love best is Synthesia, because Synthesia creates any video from text, but also specifically training videos around education. And they do it from text in a presentation style way. And they produce a video that is a training video. It is a totally different way of generating videos as compared to how you would generate videos before, which will involve studio and actors. And so it's night and day. I think there's basically zero chance that the incumbents will be able to deliver something like that, right? And so it's a disruption opportunity, because you can take over potentially sort of this new market with a totally different way, but it requires change. So people change slowly. People need to adopt a new workflow. There might be incentives inside the organization about the previous ways of working. Maybe the skills of the people employed right now don't really match that, but it might match the previous ways of doing it. And so changes, the humans are the slowing factor. But I really think that is prime land for startups that are really aiming big. but you have to think about how do you kind of traverse that.
I don't know if you know Ankur Goyal at Brain Trust. He was one of the prior guests of the show. He was talking about one of the things that he's found you have to navigate when you're selling any kind of AI tool is the structure of the organization and what are the incentives of them adopting. Like if they're, someone's skill of like, they just don't know how to use software, like they're never going to buy it. And then the other angle is something around the lines, like if they have a big team internally where someone is probably incentivized to create some tools inside of the company, it's going to be a lot more difficult to sell it to them. So I don't know where that tipping point is of, buy versus build on some of the new AI stuff, but I think it's definitely something to consider. I don't know how you would think about navigating that, but I think that's another angle.
For sure. And if you're going for change, then you have to either properly convey how you better and actually convince the current players, or maybe you go to somewhere else, or maybe someone more senior where they care less about how and more about what is being accomplished. I want to say kind of quickly about the top right, and then I maybe dig into that point, which is sort of the top right quadrant is what I call the AI native future. And frankly, it's just a culmination of those. It's like, fine, that is the sort of Android detectives, the AI therapists, the sort of maybe self-driving cars sort of sits in there, self-driving flying cars, right? Whatever it is. And theoretically, it's an infinite quadrant, right? It can grow as much as you want. It's important, in my opinion, if you're building an AI solution, to anchor there, to have a hypothesis that is probably wrong, but hopefully it's directionally right about what would be the reality in that top right. And I guess kind of the bottom line that I would say, to your point, is I find this is useful because really when you're talking about building an AI company or a company that really builds on these new capabilities that the LLMs make available to us, then you need to anchor in that top right quadrant. You need to understand what is your AI native destination, and then you need to chart your journey from the bottom left, because people are in the bottom left. They have a current way of working, they have a current level of trust. And so you have to think about what is your journey. Is it really more about IP and autonomy, and then maybe start thinking about changes that is more the Synthesia style? Is it some form of incremental path? But I think if you over rotate on the bottom left, then you'll hit a wall. At some point, people will adapt a new, presumably better way, and you'll be highly competitive, and you'll maybe ramp up quickly to dollars, but then you'll get stuck. But if you over rotate on the top right, nobody's going to use your product because it requires change and it requires trust that they do not have.
So you need like practical use cases today that actually work and fit all the form factors and everything. But then you need to have a destination of like, hey, in 5 years, when models are good enough, the costs come down, et cetera, we will be able to do X, Y, Z that seems crazy today, but we're going to get there eventually.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's like, it depends. There are probably many, even within the same industry, many paths to get to the top right. The easiest examples are the ones I gave right now, which is, robotaxis are a trust path to self-driving cars. And, that's maybe like one element of it. You can kind of argue that Tesla is a more direct line path to self-driving cars because they do meet you where you are today, and they give you small changes. It will park for itself, or it would be hands-free and sort of move. So it is a change, but it's like change in small doses that you can absorb and you can start appreciating and you go up. And like Synthesia as an example, like eventually they want to disrupt the media industry. They want to build Hollywood studios and all of that. But the training videos and those things that are much more concise, they're their path through change that is reasonable because they're met to dates. And today it's just a little bit into that change quadrant, enough that people are willing to do it. And then once that is convenient, okay, maybe I do more, maybe I do corporate videos, and then I eventually kind of get to media. So it's a mental model, and I think it's important to highlight, no matter how you build and what you build, you need to be solving a real problem and you need to be doing it well. So like all of these things are above and beyond building a product that actually works, that actually provides value, that addresses a real problem.
Yeah, I like the Tessl example because you can get in a Tesla and just drive it manually, like a traditional car, like a manual person driving car. But then you can also occasionally, if you go back maybe 10 years pre-self-driving, they slowly laddered the capabilities on. And then they're building the infrastructure to manufacture the manual cars, but also the self-driving, all the software, they can continue layering it on. So I think that's I like that example of how to think about it. You said something really interesting when we were just emailing about this. You think it's actually riskier to start an AI startup right now than like a non-AI startup. That maybe feels like a hot take because there's a lot of people starting AI companies. Or maybe it's not a hot take, but can you just explain that a little bit?
When you found a company, you need to deal with a lot of things at once. And first of all, you need to understand a landscape, like a current reality, and then you need to identify a pain in there and innovate, think about a solution. But you also need to chart the trajectory of that pain. If you're addressing a problem that will go away in 5 years, you might as well not start. I don't know, or maybe you can start with a specific strategy by selling your company very quickly. But really, you want to find pains that you have reason to believe will strengthen. And so everything I described right now is already pretty hard, and then you need to layer timing on top of that, because if you got timing wrong, you might be dead in the water as well. And I think the challenge with AI is is all of these things move faster than any other surrounding. And so it's harder to understand the current lay of the land or the current pain areas, especially if you're addressing AI related pains, because those keep changing because the foundational models are different. It's hard to assess what are the possible solutions that you would do, because you have to really kind of plan. Like, there's just more randomness to it. You have to hypothesize where the technology that offers the solution, where would that get to, but you have less clarity on that or sort of assurance on that. And then it's even harder to chart like whether a pain will grow, because you're kind of living in this world of like, maybe these problems will just go away entirely, right? Am I building something that makes lawyers more efficient, and really in 5 years' time there wouldn't be any lawyers? I'm exaggerating. I think that, but there's so I think all of these things are just like multiplied risks, and if those are not enough, the funding environment is ridiculous, and so the level of competitiveness is very hard. There are no incumbents in the AI tools specifically, and so you basically don't know who your competitors are, so you don't really know who you're setting your sights against, and you might only find out when you're already fairly deeply into your journey. There are 15 other companies doing exactly the same. You should assume that's the case. And the incumbents are more aware and more active than they've been in any other. So all of these things compound a fair bit. I think the counter argument is challenging whether you think it's worth it, whether the gold in them hills is sufficiently more plentiful that the risk reward equation is still worth it.
So what would make the gold in the hills worth it? Like, how much gold? Like, do you think about it as maybe a amount of revenue that can be captured?
Well, I think you just need to aim high. So for this risk to be worth it, the reward needs to be something that's very substantial. It needs to be disruptive. It needs to be, I will totally transform, like, for instance, anything in the services industry, anything that is done through people right now that maybe can be done through machine, that's interesting. But if you're just going to optimize those humans in some sort of linear fashion, maybe that's just not a good enough destination to be worth the risk. I guess mostly it's a little counterintuitive, and maybe I'm just totally sort of hallucinating over here, which is appropriate given we're talking about AI. But I think to an extent, if you're going to take on this risk, you might as well compound the go for broke and try something big, that type approach. I will say that there's probably an entirely opposite approach with AI, which is because it's such a fast moving space, you can really try to harness the key power of startups, which is speed and agility, and say, I'm going to build something that is very, very useful and aim to be acquired. But I mean, that's clearly a different strategy. It's one that people often don't like talking about. I don't really understand why, but in the security space, it's actually quite common for people to build a solution to some new nascent threat, or that uses some newly employed technique, and a bunch of companies jump up in that fashion, and then one of the big guys acquires them, or Palo Alto or other acquires them. And I think it's a risky strategy in its own right, but it makes for journeys that could be quite lucrative and quite short. VCs don't really like that path because it doesn't really necessarily meet their math, but for founders, it's sometimes it's an okay path.
Yeah, I mean, it can be life changing, and I know. So you've built a couple companies. One of them you sold, maybe you did that. You kind of sold it a little bit earlier. One of them you probably had opportunities to sell it, and I don't think it's been sold yet from everything that's public that I know. How can you just kind of explain those two decisions that you made and maybe give us like, I don't know, like a process to think through it?
Yeah, my first company was Blaze. I went through acquisitions as an employee and eventually landed in IBM. And then I left IBM and I founded Blaze, which made websites faster. It was kind of like an inline compiler for web pages. And I guess a few things happened. One, I didn't really know what I was doing, and I was very tech oriented. So really, everything I thought about was this technology. I thought about the tech that I knew how to build, maybe product as well, but I knew about the tech and the product that I knew how to build from the world of security around application analysis, and I felt I can apply it to another space. And after searching a bit, I landed on performance and making websites faster. Then I applied some of that knowledge to build a product and a technology that made that happen. But I don't think I was very wise in how I assessed the market evolution around it. So I had these theories that if you're inline and you can transform web pages and the likes, then you can do that for all sorts of other paths. But as the journey went on, I felt like the advantage of distribution is so important here. You really need to be in the line of fire. And so increasingly, I felt like the right place for this type of technology is someone that's in the line of fire, either the CDNs or the ADCs, the delivery controller, the load balancers of the world. I found that out because I was integrating with all these different players. And when Akamai and a few others at the time, but like came in and expressed interest in adding this application layer optimization to their platform, I guess I would sort of say I had these two views. There's the rational, what I should say, and there's what happened really. So, what I should say is that it felt like the right home for this technology. And I wasn't sure, I didn't have like high conviction that a standalone tool that I would build will be able to take that on. I basically felt like to win in this without selling, I would need to build a CDN. I will need to build something that is the delivery vehicle and that shines because it is good at the application layer. And that was its own, like I wasn't signed up to that journey.
Okay. And those already kind of existed. Like there was a couple of them around at the time, right? Akamai was like a big scaled one, right?
Well, Akamai was a very big CDN, or the biggest CDN, maybe still is the biggest CDN. But there were all sorts of other ways to get in the line of fire. But primarily, you had to either compete with the CDNs or you had to compete with the ADCs. In both cases, you had to get very good at either building hardware or setting data centers. There are very different businesses to the business that I was establishing with Blaze. And so I didn't really want to get into that. It was very like capital heavy. That's not what I want to do. But I felt like if I'm not in the line of fire, I would always be at a disadvantage. So that's the analytical view. I will also say that when you're faced with an offer that is maybe small in absolute numbers, but we've only raised a small amount by then, and it came pretty quickly, a couple of years after I founded the company, it put me in a different financial position and it allowed me to be CTO at Akamai for about half of Akamai. That was a compelling opportunity. And so I think there was the market analysis. I didn't have a big draw to sort of say, no, you're not going to take me off this path. And there was a lot of temptation. And I guess at Snyk it was very different because I feel from the get-go, I was in a good financial position. And what I wanted to do is not do again the quick flip. And so the mission itself of embed security into development was something I was passionate about. That upfront, I thought about the market, I thought about the community, I thought about the go-to-market and how do we mobilize them. And so I still had a lot of mileage to go when various acquisition offers came along. And on a personal front, I felt I was less tempted by those because I was already in a good place. I don't want to pretend that I totally ignored and just dismissed out of hand acquisition offers that came along. What happened was that I kept setting a very high bar, an unrealistic, an impractical high bar for the buyers to meet. And surprise, surprise, none of them met it. And so there is a constellation in which someone went and offered a bolder acquisition offer for Snyk, and I would have sold. In hindsight, I'm happy that didn't happen. At some point, you reach escape velocity, and an acquisition is always a possibility, but it really becomes a lower probability.
Okay. Yeah, maybe we can get into it in a couple minutes. I'm curious, maybe we hit on Blaze a little bit. What did you learn through that process? Kind of the first company going through an acquisition, any other big takeaways?
First of all, it was hard. It was maybe harder than I thought, because I thought about the technology piece a lot and the product building piece, and I didn't quite appreciate the emotional aspect of it, which I now do. I asked almost everyone I know whether they want to come work for me, and pretty much all of them, if not literally all of them, said no, including reaching out to my network in Israel for remote employees. And, I was in Ottawa at the time, everybody I knew over there. And it was really only after I convinced my slightly kind of late co-founders, brought a co-founder who was supporting me before, but he wasn't known to be a co-founder. So only when he became public that I could get a leader in engineering to say yes, because he sort of thought it through. And only after he came, then others kind of came along. And so that was hard to sort of cope with.
So why wouldn't people join? Was it not a sexy category? Were you bad at selling the vision, or?
You have to believe in the founders. You have to believe not just the idea, but rather that this person will raise money, will take the company further. And we spend so much time talking about whether the VCs believe in this founder, but really it's the employees that really kind of matter. And I think I lost some firepower over there by the fact that I moved from Israel to Ottawa at the time. So my network in Ottawa was not as strong. And for the people in Israel, it was a bit less compelling because I was remote. But I think it's just really hard. And I think the primary advice I would give is anticipating a little bit who would be your first employees. It's okay to go 3 people, 4 people for quite a while. It doesn't have to be a massive team, but getting the first few was very, very hard. I guess the second bit that I think worked very well is that we invested in getting customers to engage with us early on. And we had a bit of a fake it till you make it. So we put a little fake website, or not fake website, a real website that allowed you to plop in, that had a little video on it that explained what we do and allowed you to put your URL and your email. And we would send you, after you plug them in, video showing side by side your site before and after Blaze.
Oh, how fast it would load?
And it was a system that really, I think, was smarter than we thought. We were smarter than we thought we were, even at the time when I look at it in hindsight, because what happened was you plopped that in. It was a very low bar. We would score the leads that came in based on whether the website is one of high traffic. And if the email matched the website, those would really bump up to the top. We would run it through an automated before after, which actually optimized it with the product. And then if the results were very good, we would automatically send it back to you, the video. If the results were not good, then if the rank was high, it would go to one of us, and we would tweak and tune and doing it and try to kind of get it to work well. And if it does, then we will send you the video on it. And if it didn't, then we would try to sort of engage in some other ways. If you were ranked low, then we just sort of sent you a little bit of hey, there's a few things on your site that we don't deal with yet, and we'll do it. And that led to some really, really interesting test cases that I don't know we would have thought of, and to a few interesting websites doing it. So I think this notion of well ahead of the product launching, giving customers an opportunity to taste the value proposition and giving you the opportunity to test the value proposition and what resonates was really good. Because, for instance, when we sent them numbers, it made no effect. But when we sent them a side-by-side video, it created a visceral effect. And we even went as far as when we went to conferences, we would try to get a list of who might attend that conference ahead of time. And we ran all these videos. So someone would stop by the booth and we would say, oh, you're in United. Hey, what site? I've got a thing to show you. And you'd sort of show them the United website before and after Blaze. And I think that visceral response was very, very good.
When I was talking to Ed at Boldstar, I had him on the podcast a couple months ago. I know you kind of helped me come up with some ideas to talk to him. So I asked him, I was like, what should I ask Guy? And then during the podcast, he mentioned that you went to a ton of these conferences early on to kind of sell. I think it was maybe more Snyk than Blaze, but I guess, what is your strategy for then conferences? It sounds like that's a pretty interesting idea, like that strategy. But how do you do an effective conference as like a vendor?
It depends on what you're trying to do. So I didn't go to a ton of conferences as in we sponsored a ton of conferences, but rather me personally went there. I think it's important to know the audience that you're targeting when you're launching. And ideally, you find a community that is big enough and small enough. So it needs to be big enough that it matters, that if you are a figure in this community, then then that leads to sort of good business opportunities and good growth. And that becomes your base, right? Your sort of your initial customer base. So it has to be big enough for that. And it has to be small enough that you can become a part of the top. You can make it to the top. You can become a known entity. And I did that in both performance and in Snyk and developer security. In performance, this world of front-end optimization, which is actually a term that we coined, but web performance optimization, WPO was the term that was being used there. The community focusing on performance was big enough and small enough. It was hovering around velocity. It was the secondary community in velocity next to DevOps, where sort of a lot of the initial next to the ops side where a lot of the DevOps motion started. So it was big enough and influential enough that enough people cared about it. Google was advocating for it at the time as well, but it was small enough that I could engage with it, really deeply understand it, find some interesting topics and go. And I would do thought leadership pieces. It wasn't really about promoting the product. It was around promoting kind of Guy and through me Blaze as experts, as people that know it. And I would always include some things. And you also look for trends. So Blaze, for instance, the mobile web was just in its infancy. And so we created some before-after measurements for mobile devices. And that created a lot of traffic and a lot of interest because the web performance community. So find thought leadership. And in Snyk, we did similarly with Node.js. So Node.js was a community that was big enough and small enough. It was big enough that enough enterprises were using it and all that, but it was still small enough that I could make it to the top. And I really combed the US mostly and a little bit outside. There's a lot of flying and a lot of middle seat, red eye flights across the pond because I live in the UK. And I went to any meetup that would take me on Node, and I would try to talk about interesting things. And notably, I would build compelling presentations around security. So I built this sort of stranger danger talk that showed how you can hack an application because it happened to be using a vulnerable library without any vulnerability in its code. And I think within a fairly short period of time, I became a known name in that space like I was in performance. And so in this case, I was tapping into, every person has their competency. And I'm a decent evangelist and public speaker. I like doing it. I don't like the middle seat flights, but I do like the presentation. So I leaned into it. But regardless of whether you do it personally or through people that you employ or through content pieces or through conference presentations, I think the key thing is to identify the community that you want to influence and to become a figure in it. And for that to matter, it needs to be big enough and small enough.
Are there any, secrets to becoming influential? Do you feel like there's anything you specifically did? Is there a social proof aspect? Is there you usually need to come with a couple, hacks or tricks where people say, oh, that was pretty smart. This guy knows what he's talking about. Was there anything there that you think you did well?
There are probably different approaches, but I would say first and foremost, you have to put your product aside. People over-rotate on, if I'm going to be on stage, I need to talk about my product. And I think that's a mistake. It depends maybe a little bit on the community, but especially if you're talking about anything that is bottom-up or product-led or developer community, any of those, they would smell that a mile away and reputation precedes you. And so you want to be careful. That needs to come across in the abstract. In fact, you need to overcome because the abstract comes from a company, it immediately gets judged as assuming it will be commercial. And so you have to overcome that. And so you have to really focus on what do you think the community would want to hear. I think you need to be willing to be a little bit sensationalist. We had probably the most notable one is that we did an iPhone versus Android early in Android's days around the mobile browser performance. And we ran a measurement, we ran a legit measurement, and Android smoked iPhone by a margin. And we published it, and it made top tech news. And then people, it was 3 days in a row. The first day was hey, Android smokes iPhone in this performance test. And then Apple issued a response, which never happens. Apple issues a response, and they said that the tests were done with the embedded browser and not the native browser, which cannot be automated, that doesn't have some Nitro engine, I think, at the time on it. And so the next day, we were top tech news. It's debunked. The test is not correct. And then the third day was all these conspiracy theories about hold on, is Apple crippling applications, versus that? Why isn't the embedded browser as good as the native browser on iPhone while it is on it? And it was an emotional set of days. People are angry. We got hate mail on the sort of support case, which was in hindsight entertaining. In the moment, not at all entertaining, but it was great because it sparked interest and it drew attention, and these bumps keep you at the top. And so you have to be real. And our industry, like our top competitor, wrote a blog post titled "In Defense of Blaze." So because it was, people were faulting it for no reason, and they were trying to capitalize on the attention, but in practice they actually kind of helped make awareness because we were a lot smaller than they were. And I think you have to be willing to ruffle some feathers. I think data is always useful. So I don't know if it's one thing or the other, but really if you focus on looking at things that really got the community going and investing in those, and as opposed to focusing on your product, the messages have to align with the thing that you're promoting. We were highlighting how performance matters. At Snyk, we did a bunch of data reports and such around open source vulnerabilities, and we did some sort of security research studies. But we're always trying to be helpful. It was always with a spin of how can you help it. And really, I think probably our primary viral push over there was helping open source projects be more secure. And so being free for open source and promoting over there. You have to think about content. You have to think about the community. Content is one of the means on it. We've built specific products over time. We built Snyk Advisor, but it always anchors in, you need to identify your community. It needs to be big enough and small enough. You have to think about how do you become a useful entity, a presence in that community. And all of those things have to anchor in what does the community need, not what do you want to sell them. Once you build credibility, they would listen to you more about what is it that you might be offering.
Interesting. It sounds like there's some element of even bad press is good press, if that makes sense. Like it's not like that could have been, interpreted as being a disaster. Like you got pushed back on your thing, but it still seems like it worked out.
Yeah, and I don't think bad press. I think it depends on how you behaved. I think that's really sort of the question, right? Like we wrote a blog post, which is, this Nitro thing was not known, and so Apple did it, and so we're happy that they've sort of announced it, and we're gonna, look for ways. We'd love for Apple to open up interfaces, and so I think those moments are not necessarily great, but oftentimes if you want to get something that is engaging, you want to elicit strong opinions, and you need to feel comfortable that you weren't just bullshitting or hiding anything or sort of being authentic. So if you represent yourself, that's okay. But you don't need to seek perfection, and you don't need to avoid controversy. Anything that you post with data that voices a strong opinion about the conclusion, for instance, would anger some people and not other. So, and to each his own. Look, different industries, different individuals, you have to lean into your strengths. So I don't want to paint this as the only playbook. That's just the one that I would put.
Okay, that's fair. And I want to hit on one more thing that you kind of hit on earlier. You mentioned you moved to Ottawa. Just kind of like, if you rank maybe like top startup hubs, like I don't even know if they're on any list, at least back in the early, I think it was like maybe 2010-ish.
2004. This is when we moved, yeah.
So why did you move to Ottawa of all places?
Yeah, I couldn't place Ottawa on a map when I moved there.
Well, it's the capital of Canada, so it's
the capital of Canada. I knew that it's the capital of Canada from Capital Games, but I didn't know where it actually was. And I bet you most of your listeners now don't either.
Yeah, probably not. I'm Canadian, so I do kind of know.
If you're curious, it's between Montreal and Toronto, a bit closer to Montreal. You might be able to place those cities on a map. But it was an opportunity. So I was in Israel. I was working for this company called Sanctum, an early pioneer in the AppSec space. It got acquired by Watchfire, which had an R&D center in Ottawa and a business center in Boston. We had a long conversation about a bunch of the people in the office moving to either Boston or Santa Clara as part of the acquisition. And my girlfriend at the time, wife, we were both talking about how we want to relocate at some point. And the plan to move a bunch of people to Boston and such went away. There was an opportunity to move to Ottawa that was offered to me. It was a good career opportunity to be a bit of the liaison between the two dev teams, software developer at the time. And we were interested in trying out this relocation thing. And so we seized the moment and we tried it. There's a Mark Andreessen quote. I'm critical about a bunch of Mark Andreessen's recent comments, but I do think he's brilliant. And there's a quote from an old blog post that he has, which is swap career planning for strategic opportunity taking. Which in hindsight, I realized when I read that, it's like my career path was like that, which is you want to be in a place in which you're useful and you are offered opportunities, and then you need to have the courage to take them when they happen. And some will succeed and some will not. And so we moved for a year. We ended up staying there for 10. By the way, it's a really nice place. It is a high quality of life city. It has a decent amount of tech in it. And IBM acquired Watchfire. I left. I founded a company. I sold that company. We had 2 kids. We lived in 5 houses. We made our own excitement. And I will say that after 2 years there, that we had no new kids, no new companies. The adventurous itch came in again. And in 2014, we moved to London, UK, which is more, when you say Ottawa, you need to say London, UK, and not London, Ontario.
Yeah, fair. You didn't move like an hour down the street. You moved across the ocean.
It wasn't to London, Ontario. It was to London, UK, and moved there. So, but I think, use opportunities. I think different perspectives are very valuable. It's true for professions. It's true for locations. I want to give another example of that, which is I was a software developer. I felt like I wanted to try something else. I felt like I wanted to be a product manager, but there were no product management jobs available. And I had an opportunity to be a sales engineer for like big and complex deals. And after a bunch of deliberation, I took that opportunity and I was in that role for about 6 months. It was very intense. It was super interesting. It absolutely clarified that I did not want to do that job as my career. To me, I learned a ton. And I think that gave me all sorts of insights that would have been very hard to get without doing that job. And then a product management job came along and I moved into that. And I consider myself primarily a product person today. I'm an entrepreneur first, maybe a product person second. But I feel like, you use those opportunities, they're not forever. And I think these different perspectives, especially when they're outside of your comfort zone, are important. And if you're comfortable, you're not growing. Freud says there's no growth without pain. So maybe you need to have a little bit of pain tolerance if you want to keep growing.
Interesting. And that's an interesting, maybe a career move that people can think through is if you want to go from engineering to product, maybe working as a sales engineer is an interesting stepping stone. And that is basically, you're still doing all the coding, you're still engineering, but you are basically interfacing with the customer and with the sales team is it just incorporate the customer feedback essentially and build what the sales team needs built? Is that kind of the TLDR?
Well, I think you do the demos, you do the POCs. Oftentimes sales engineers do have post-sale responsibility that is akin to customer success, especially if customer success people are not as technical in that organization. I think sales engineers are probably the most underappreciated people in the company, because like salespeople get the glory because they get the deals, the product people, the engineers, they get the glory because they build those out. And sales engineers are oftentimes really the ones that make it happen, and also the ones that fill in all the gaps.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like they're in a role where they just kind of like, what if it doesn't fall down the fairway, they're the one that kind of have to kind of figure it out.
It is super, super hard. I will also point out that it's one of the least diverse communities, and we had to work really hard at Snyk to make it more diverse. David Badger, who was building out our SC team at the time, did an incredible job building an internship program to get women in it. Now we have amazing sort of female sales engineers at Snyk, but it's very, very hard. But I think it's a very valuable job. Fortunately, it does pay pretty well. And so they do get a little bit recognized that way. But I think it's very insightful. And I think if you want to be a founder and you're on the engineering side and you're thinking about which skills might you want to acquire while you're still in your existing company on it, spending time on the go-to-market side is super, super valuable. And if you're coming from the technical side, a tech sales or a customer success type role, or even a support related role are probably the best examples of that. And it gives you perspectives that become invaluable when you build a company.
And so and is that because you still kind of get a leg in the technical side and you can kind of hold your own versus just being thrown into like cold call outbound, doing this repetitive sales, much like you're still kind of grounded in something that you're familiar with?
Well, I think the reason I suggest the tech roles is because, you're sort of building on a muscle that you have. Every job that you come into, there's what you're bringing it, there's what you're, learning on the job. As for what you're learning on the job is, I think you learn how you actually interact with customers and prospects in the real world. So when you're on the product side, you control the narrative. You say, this is what I want to tell you about the product. This is what I want to tell you about the feature. And yes, maybe, we can talk about it. You come back and sort of say, I think it doesn't work, but you're within my story. And when you're on the sales side, you're within the customer's story. Like, this is what the customer needs. This is their environment. This is what they're trying to do. does your product fit? And you have to sort of fit the product. And it's such an utterly different lens that it can be very humbling, I guess, to sort of see it. And when you build a company, if you're stuck in the first approach, you're almost guaranteed to fail. If you're leading with the second approach of what is their world, then you know you're solving correct problems, or rather, you know you're trying to solve the correct problems. And I think your odds of building something of value are that much higher.
So, talking about starting companies, you started another one. You started Snyk after Blaze. I'm curious why you stayed at Akamai for, I think it was like 4 years. You actually stayed there, it seems like almost twice, at least based on LinkedIn, twice as long as when you were kind of working on Blaze. Why did you stay for such a long time? And what kind of things did you learn while you were still there?
I did stay there for a long time. I don't know if it was quite 4, maybe like 3.5 or 3 point something years. And really my driver in life is impact and learning. And so throughout that time, I felt like I was having impact and that I was learning and growing. I got a chance to be the CTO of the web performance business under Mike African at the time, was GMing there. It's like roughly $700 million a year business at the time, and be a bit of an honorary member of the security part because of my background. And it was fascinating to do that. I've never done that type of job before. I had all sorts of mandates from Tom Layton, who later became CEO, as the founder, as the chief scientist at the time, to connect different dev teams within the organization. And I built like a sequence of these tech talks between the dev teams in which people showcased what they worked to the rest of the Akamai engineering team. I helped open up Akamai to the community, the web performance community, because Akamai was fairly insular before. And then I worked on all sorts of interesting technology innovations and built again, with all of these great people from within, not working alone, a labsy organization within it, and was part of sort of the speedy and HTTP2 motions of it. So those things were just really interesting technologically, organizationally. And I found that such very, very gratifying. I worked very hard. I was in a global role out of Ottawa, which doesn't have a lot of direct flights. And I would sort of globetrot a lot, and we moved with them to London and had its own pros and cons. And so I think as long as I felt like I was learning new things, a bunch of business cases for acquisitions, as long as I felt like I was doing something of value within the organization and felt like I was having impact, I was happy. Eventually, I left for 2 reasons. One is inside of the organization where I was geographically in London, even in Ottawa before, I couldn't really take on some of the more core challenges I saw around innovation and speed at Akamai. And I wasn't really willing personally to move into those locations. And I wasn't sure that what I want to do in terms of how I spend my time is to tackle those problems. I thought those were the right problems to tackle, but I was no longer satisfied tackling the surrounding opportunities that I saw there. And then the second was the pull from the outside, which is I got the itch to do another startup. And it's addictive, as I guess I'm proving now because I'm doing my third. And over time, you forget the lows and you remember the highs. And that sort of drove me to do something. And I did have a chip on my shoulder a little bit at the time, and I felt I was CTO in the first one. Can I be CEO? I brought in, Mike Wider, who's amazing, and who was a second-time founder, to join me as a co-founder at Blaze. Is it really just because of him that it was successful? Fine, it was my idea and kind of my technology, but we really only succeed because it was Mike on there. Or can I actually sort of do this myself as well? And can I take on a bigger problem? So I had all these, it wasn't so much doubt, but things I wanted to prove to myself that I can do. I don't think I was trying to prove it to anybody else. I think I was trying to prove it to myself. So I was driven. Now founding Tessl, I don't have any of these chips on my shoulder anymore. And so, doing that required a lot of soul searching of what is it that I want to do, and to decide that even though it makes no sense, and from a practical perspective, what I want to do is to found another company and to aim even higher.
Yeah, you should, in theory, you should be on a yacht, discommunicated, floating in the Mediterranean, in the Caribbean somewhere.
You might have noticed that I have a bunch of catchphrases. As I think about those, I find it helpful to sort of distill my thoughts. And, for me, the key one is there's no satisfaction without struggle, or satisfaction comes out of struggle. And so I feel like if you're unwilling to put yourself in a place in which you're struggling, in which you're trying something hard, that you might fail, you don't get satisfaction. So I had my last year and a half where I was part-time at Snyk, and I was angel investing. I was doing all sorts of things. We have a family charity. I was kind of helping support that. We're very comfortable. As I mentioned before, there's no growth without pain, and at the same time, like I felt like I was learning all sorts of things, like fascinating people around me, and I was enjoying it, but I wasn't satisfied. I wasn't really doing anything. And yeah, you want to put yourself into something that you find worthy, that you actually care about achieving, and be willing to work hard, be willing to fail. And then when you succeed, which hopefully you do, then that is sort of the real kind of gratification. And the kind of the catch with that is that it does slightly require you to seek the next mountaintop, because once you know you can do a thing and you can do it more easily, it's a bit less of a struggle, and it's a bit less satisfying. And that's okay. Like, as life evolves, I'd like to think that at some point I would not seek as much struggle. But I still have enough energy. At least this one, it's going to take a while. So we'll see what happens in a decade or two when Tessel is so big and successful that I can leave it in peace.
So we'll have to have you back on the podcast then in a decade or two.
If you're still running the podcast in a decade or two, I will come on as a guest.
Talking about Snyk a little bit, what was the insight to start it? Because you said you got this itch. I know a little bit of the story, but probably not the full story. Like, what was the thinking around starting Snyk?
The Blaze, I got a front row seat to the rise of DevOps, and what performance right alongside ops were one of the first industries to be disrupted with DevOps. And I saw what happened to the performance companies over there. And I remembered how in the security world, in the AppSec world that I worked at, in the sort of 3 companies prior to Blaze, we always wanted to shift left. I was saying shift left back in 2002, trying to get developers to embed security. IBM acquired Watchfire. It was IBM Rational that acquired Watchfire, which was the developer division on the premise that we can do it. And we kept failing. We succeeded financially with the products, but we failed to get developers to embrace it. And what I saw was the opportunity to apply the DevOps practices, the learnings, the playbook from these DevOps companies to the world of security. And I combined that, talk about trajectory of a problem, with also thinking that DevOps is accelerating software development, and security teams are already not keeping up with the pace of software development. So with DevOps, this need is just going to go from nice to have efficiency play to nothing else is feasible. And so both, I kind of had a lens that I felt was unique or near unique to an appreciation of both the AppSec problem and need, the DevOps kind of playbook of how to tackle it, and the sort of the trajectory of the problem, that it's going to get worse. I had a conviction that this has to happen. There's a why now element to it. And so I think all of these things really culminated to making me want to do it. I almost didn't go into it because of its security. Like, I sort of felt, security is a bit of a dirty industry. And I talk about security conferences, right? And what I said at the time, I think it's still true today, is, when you go to a security conference, you go to like a Black Hat or whatever it is, RSA, and you come back and you kind of want to curl up in a corner and cry. And it's like, the world is terrible. Like, nothing will ever work. It's all going to be breakable, and it's very adversarial. And then you kind of go to a Velocity at the time on it. It was very like a bunch of people singing Kumbaya together, and sort of like, the web is always amazing and all these things that we can build. And I very much wanted to be like singing Kumbaya more than crying in corners. And so I debated, and the way to resolve that problem is that I really felt like the right way to tackle the problem anyway is to build a developer tooling company that tackles security. And so, like, to really embrace the builder mindset, the builder culture, and bring that to security also is one of the means of breaking through to developers. And so those and many other thoughts are what really drove me to take it on. And it felt like an aspiration that is like, everybody has tried and failed and you're going to succeed. But also felt like there was a good why now, there's a good why me, and that it definitely was worth my time to try.
So this is sort of a question from Ed Boldstart. He said, you're really good at deciding, kind of threading the needle on specific, like where to tilt the product in specific directions. How did you kind of decide what to go to market with first? You were kind of sort of creating a new category, I guess. I think the word was developer-friendly security.
Yeah, developer first security.
Yeah. So how did you kind of decide what people would adopt first?
I feel it's important to be focused on what is most important. And so the conviction at the time was that in the world of security, getting dev adoption is really what we need to break through and prove, and that revenue will follow if we can figure that out. I did think revenue would follow more easily.
So I'm curious then, why was that a big deal in getting developer adoption versus anyone else?
Yeah, I feel so. So you need to build an appreciation for what is the problem in your domain. And specifically for me, the challenge was that developers didn't want to use security tools, and that security tools were not fit for purpose for developers. Like it really wasn't a good experience for a developer to use it. And so the question is like, what would make a developer use the product? And the hypothesis from a business perspective was, if we get developers to embrace the tool, good things will follow. Like that is the thing that has not been successfully done before that we need to break through. So really, we should be entirely focused on getting developers to embrace the product. And so everything we built was modeled after the dev tool companies that we looked up to. And at the time was, Heroku and New Relic and GitHub to an extent, and a bunch of like, how are they working it? And oftentimes trying to contrast that to security companies and how do they operate, and really create that duality. And I will say that all the way till today, Snyk's kind of main strength comes from balancing those two, because we sit in between. We are a security offering. We help the organization reduce risk, but we really are a tool used by developers and for the purpose of sort of building higher quality, notably secure software. And so we have to serve both masters. But at the beginning, we weren't balancing it at all. And I think that was the right decision, even though it cost us. And we were like, developer. What do I need to do there? And I think we innovated on the product front in all sorts of ways, because we really, it wasn't, we weren't thinking about some cool technology innovations. We were thinking about developer experience. For instance, we launched a command line interface, a crappy command line interface that could scan your Node.js application and tell you if you're using a vulnerable library. And it was small and it was crappy. But right away, it appreciated that a developer's job isn't to find problems, it's to fix them. And so the default next experience that you had with the command line tool, which also had a good developer experience elements to it, was to fix the dependency chain that you had. And our vulnerability database was terrible, and you could patch a vulnerability, except there weren't any patches in the database. And so the tool could do it, but there wasn't really. But like none of the developers asked any of those questions. Like that wasn't really what they were saying. The question is like, are you thinking about what I need to do? I don't need to find out about another ticket that I need to put into my backlog. I need to fix it. I'm going to get that ticket back on the other side. And so just fix the problem for me. And then we learned later that they used the command line interface and they liked it and they tweeted good things about it, and they didn't put it in the build. It's like, why are you not putting it in the build? It's like, well, because it's too hard. It's like, I don't think about it. That's like a longer term, that's tomorrow's problem. I don't really notice that I haven't done it. And so we needed the onboarding to be next. And we realized that the way to do that was a GitHub app. And we kind of thought about, to be frank, we used a bit of a time window in which GitHub apps were a bit too permissive in how much they allowed people to install them. And so it was also easier maybe to promote it across open source projects. So like, fine, here, we'll do the GitHub app, do the same flows, like next, add your repositories, we'll add it to all your repositories. Why wouldn't you do this? We will scan quietly. When there's a new vulnerability comes along, we'll open a fix pull request. We'll add it to your system. So you just need to do next, minimum friction, very friendly, does not break the build, which people were concerned about. It just adds a thing in your pull request to tell you if you added something vulnerable. It was like, cool, let's do that. We started designing those. Like, you know what? Turns out now, without building the application, you need to know which dependencies this application uses, which requires building the application. Well, that doesn't work. Okay, let's build technology to approximate the dependency tree so that I can look at the source code and get a fairly accurate picture of what dependencies it uses. And that was hard technology, which the amazing team that we had built. But it was always from this is the use case, this is what developers need to be successful. Now let's make it happen. And I think that lens continues to thrive. Eventually, nobody paid us. So like eventually we got the developers using it, and we realized that we might have still sort of done the right thing, because I think this sort of hyper focus on developers helped us crack through some problems that others have failed before. So if we were hedging, we might not have gotten to those But at the end of the day, to be successful, that first year in which we broke through to developers gave us no revenue. It took us another full year. 2 years in, we had about $100,000 ARR in it. And only at around that time, we finally managed to also figure out what security teams need and what would make them purchase the product. And once we did, the graph started to curve in the right direction.
So I've kind of two questions on this. I'll ask the first one first. How did you market the product and how did you get developers to start using it? Like, it sounds, based on what you said, people weren't paying, but they were using it. What's the secret to kind of cracking developer marketing?
There's no single secret to cracking developer marketing. I said some of the things before. You have to be authentic. You have to think about these communities. What is it that they actually need for the product? You have to put yourself in the shoes of the user. You have to, in our case, think, what is a fit for purpose product from developers need? What do they need? What does the user need to do? I think that's a core PLG element, which is there's the question of what does the buyers need? What does the company need? But what does the user need? What is the job to be done that the user is trying to do? And what is the context in which they see the product? And so I think it's important to have that empathy and understand what is the pain, why are they not doing a thing, and not always resort to education. Really, in everything in life, there's how hard it is and there's how much you care. And you need to care more than it is hard. And so when people are not doing things, it's either because you've tackled the wrong problem and they don't care enough and maybe you need to change the problem, or because it's too hard and you need to make it easy. And yet what people try to do is they try to educate you to make you care more. That's the hardest path. You really don't want to do that. So how do you make it easy? How do you touch an existing exposed vein that is correct? How do you relate it to a pain that you actually have? And then beyond that, you need reach. And so you get reach by being where your users are. In the context of developers, the two primary answers are conferences and community and going around and giving presentations and meetups, and there's certain critical mass, and open source. And I think a big part of our success came from the fact that we became prevalent amidst open source projects. And that wasn't by chance, that was an explicit strategy. And to do that, you need to be valuable to open source. You want to help open source projects implicitly or explicitly amplify you through their lens. And so we had badges that said vulnerability 0. You can add a badge to your GitHub repo, showcasing they care, something that is useful to them, showcasing something to their consumers. But if you click that vulnerabilities tag, you got to Snyk, to get the report that shows you have 0 vulnerabilities, which is actually useless. It was like you clicked it, you saw nothing, but the declaration was useful and you were there. So hey, why don't you just scan your own projects? And similarly, the fix pull requests that we opened up. So you have to think about where your users are.
You also have had multiple podcasts that run for a very long time. I know you have a new one. Is that a big lens? Like how do you run an effective podcast? Like, and do they work?
So I started at Snyk, a podcast called The Secure Developer. And it was a principle coming out of the DevOps world, in which one of the key changes that helped DevOps succeed was people's willingness to talk about failure, to talk about other practices, what worked for them, what didn't. While in the world of IT ops, before, people were very, it was embarrassing, it was a taboo topic. And it was sort of a pivotal change for the ops industry. And so in security, it's hard to talk about breaches, but you can talk about successes and failures in terms of your program and things like that. And so the idea of the secure developer was like, okay, let's do a collaboration platform. Let's get actually primarily AppSec people, not so much developer, to talk about what worked for them, what doesn't. And what you do with that is that you really bring the people that are smart, you give them a stage, you help drive the movement, you help bring together a shared mindset, right? People that are leading this sort of new way of thinking that you think is right, and you promote them. And the Secure Developer is still running. It has Danielle and Snyk CTO is running it right now. I think I ran about 130 episodes on it, so like a good while. Talked to brilliant people that I really, really think shaped my thinking, the industry's thinking, the product. And I think it was very, very valuable for the community, even though it remained niche, like from a listenership perspective, it's in the tens of thousands or something like that. So per episode, it's not tiny, but it's an important audience. Like for that community, that's a big portion. And I think it helped form the dev movement. Today, I have a new podcast called the AI Native Dev podcast. I have some amazing, if I can shill it a bit, there's like some amazing guests. I had the founder of Intercom on it. I had Tamar, who's the chief product officer at Glean. I had Jason Warner, who was the ex-CTO of GitHub, building Copilot there and now runs Poolside. Itamar from Codium, like all sorts of tools. And what's common about all these people is they have brilliant thoughts about what is AI native development, or what is the impact of AI on software development? Where is it today? Where is it going tomorrow? We do a bunch of like real live demos on it, ask some tough questions. Simon, Mabel, and I. So what we want to do is we want to be a sharing platform to help us as a group, as a community, think about what is the future of software development for AI, or what is the future of software development in the era of AI. And we do that not by speaking at people and sort of saying what our opinion is, but rather bringing smarter people and hopefully asking them the right questions and identifying patterns. And I think podcasts are useful for that. To an extent, it comes back to niches. It comes back to understanding who is it that you are trying to talk to, and what is it that is useful for them to know. Tessl doesn't even have a product yet. Like, we will build an amazing AI native development platform. Hopefully, you would be very excited by that. And I encourage you to sign up at tessl.io and kind of be the first to know when things come out. But the AI native dev podcast and our expected other community motions around it are all around helping the community learn from one another, right? And we will facilitate that and we'll contribute to it. But it really isn't about our product. It's about the community and what it needs. And hopefully you sense some repetition between that statement and the kind of convictions I shared before about how I think you want to sort of build a successful change maker in an industry.
Yeah, I think we'll throw a link to both down in the show notes if people want to check them out. I think it was the first episode I listened to. It was pretty interesting. I mean, I know how to code HTML, but I'm not like a pro developer or anything. But it was pretty interesting to just hear everybody's opinion. So I have kind of two more things I wanted to hit on. You mentioned before, like 2 years in to Snyk, it wasn't clear it was gonna work, quote unquote. I think those were kind of your words. And you had a failed Series A. Obviously, you made it. You kind of crossed the chasm at this point. But can you kind of take us inside that? And how did you navigate that?
Yeah, I'll tell you briefly. I mean, people have this sort of misconception oftentimes when they see a success story that it was always up and to the right. And I think it pretty much never is. In Snyk's case, about a year and a bit into the company, we looked very compelling from the outside because we had all this dev adoption. A lot of it was visible in open source. And so a lot of VCs were circling and saying, hey, maybe, that's exciting on it. And being, I guess, a second-time founder, but still somewhat naive, I bit and I kind of hyped up as everybody was interested. And it was like, hey, maybe, like someone said, we might want to do a preemptive A, like very little conviction. And I said, oh, I want to do a preemptive A. And I told all the other VCs, like, look, there's a preemptive A coming and all that. And what happened was that everybody looks behind the scenes or behind the curtains and they realize there's no revenue. We haven't sort of cracked that. It's like, oh, classic dev tooling company, lots of usage, no revenue. And nobody converted. And actually, I got one offer from an investor that I liked personally, but was not the right offer and not from the right fund. Basically, nobody else converted. And I've kind of burnt a bit of an opportunity with a bunch of them because once you tell everybody that a round is happening and then nothing happens, then your credibility drops. So everybody looked at it, nobody really liked it, and you might put yourself in trouble. To make things worse, I had a personal event happen over there. My father-in-law passed away, like literally, like in the morning, I got the one offer that I got. And in the afternoon, we got a call that he passed away. And this was in Israel. So we packed our bag, we flew over, we're doing it. And then after we have the Shiva, like in the midst of the Shiva, which is the sort of 7 days of mourning post someone passing away, I have calls with VCs booked. And sort of like my wife's house on it. It's like, what do I do? It's not like I'm successful with these things. And I think I want to sort of tell maybe two small stories of what happened there. One is it just happened to be that on the Monday morning, like after the weekend there, my first call in that mode was with Tom Hume from GV, and which I didn't know him at the time. This was like we weren't. And I told him quickly, kind of at the beginning, what this was, and he says, like, guy, I don't want to talk to you right now. Go sell your things, go and talk to me after you're sort of past this. And I don't think you should talk to an investor that wants to talk to you right now. And I thought that was very good. And I ended up working, like keeping space for him in a more successful sort of Series A later to come and invest. I think it paid dividends, and it was he's since become a very good friend of mine. And then the second that I want to give credit to is to Ed at Boldstart, which is after indeed the dust settled and I had no kind of other sort of deals at hand, Ed came along and says, look, you got this one offer. It's like not a bad offer. You might not want to do this. Why don't we top you up with a sort of a smaller amount on those terms? And because we believe, we still believe in the vision. We think you cracked the hard thing, which is developer adoption. We think you're going to crack revenue, but you can't go back to the well right now. It's a bit tainted. So you need to demonstrate more success. You need to fix the problem that people were talking to you about. And I did, and we did. It's like a year later, we're sort of in a totally different reality. And so I, first of all, very, very much value Ed and Tom for that. And I pulled in Ed and Tom, like now that I'm fortunate enough to have kind of my pick when I talk about investors. Ed and Tom are the investors in Tessl that I reached out to. And those were like important points of sort of the journey with them. And I think it's a good, it's not so much karma, it's more like long-term thinking, from investors. But also, to me, remains a cautionary tale to founders, which is you need to sort of think through things through. You don't need to sort of give in to the glamour of VCs being interested. It is VC's job to be interested, to explore, to be curious, and maybe sometimes to convey more conviction than they do until they actually have to say it. And so you just have to be more careful.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's a good lesson. It's always good to learn from failures or mistakes, especially when at the other side there's some success that you can.
And it's never up and to the right, never up and to the right. And you need to remember that because there are a lot of tough moments. This is the most tellable story I have from Snyk. It is far from the only story that I have at Snyk.
Maybe next time you come on the podcast in a decade or two, we can talk about some of the other Snyk stories then.
I'd be happy to. It might be worth saying that my intent is to keep posting some of my learnings from entrepreneurship advice on the Tessel blog, as I have now with this AI mental model. So you might want to stay tuned to that as well.
We'll throw some links in the show notes if people want to check those out, subscribe, follow along, and check out the product when you guys launch it.
Sounds good. Appreciate that.
Amazing. Well, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for joining.
Oh, thanks for having me on. It's super fun.
And thank you for listening. Make sure to check out the show notes if you want to go deeper on some of the topics mentioned throughout the conversation. If you like this episode, it would mean the world if you liked, subscribed, commented, followed, and shared it with a friend who can learn from it. And if you don't want to miss future episodes, subscribe to my newsletter, The Split, in the show notes, and you'll get links plus a transcript for every new episode emailed directly to your inbox. Thanks again for listening. See you in the next episode.
Hey everyone, Eric here. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from our AI and investing cluster of podcasts to shows that drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, investors, and influencers, like Econ 102 with Noah Smith. We're launching new shows every week, and we're looking for industry-leading sponsors. If you think that might be you and your company, email me at eric@turpentine.co. That's ERIK @turpentine.co, and let's partner together.